Hello, Ngaio. How are you?
Hi, Connie. Yeah, I'm doing good.
Good. Well, for anybody who hasn't met Ngaio on last year's, hard to believe that it was last year.
No kidding.
Uh, we did a workshop on on funerals and what people should know and those kinds of things. And we're going to put that into the description below. Just in case you want to see that. But this is a more intimate conversation and maybe a little bit more difficult conversation about end of life and funeral planning and what you can do to have a good end of life and for your family to not have complex grief about um, the way that things turned out at the end. What's a good end of life? What's a good death? What's a good um, goodbye, so to speak? So I just wanted to say that I have known Nio, I was thinking about the other day, probably about
Mm.
13 years.
Holy cow.
Yeah. We met on a beautiful summer day, probably exactly this time of the year. We went to Maple Ridge independently to attend a death cafe and we started talking and we went to a local park and we talked and we talked and we talked and we talked. And that was the beginning of a beautiful friendship.
And here we are still talking.
Exactly. We go out for death dinners at least once a year on a patio with wine and beer, and we talk everything death. I feel so comfortable with this subject with you, and I learned so much. So I'm hoping that people learn a lot today. So thank you for coming.
Thanks, Connie. I always so appreciate, not only everything you do, but just that you are so supportive of other people who are doing work in an adjacent field to what you're doing, and how much you just offer information and education to the public and such needed information and education. You're so generous with your time. You're a total example to myself and other people. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Oh, thank you. I can't remember the word for it, but Renee Brown uses it. It's the celebration of when somebody else does good things. Instead of pulling them down, you lift them up, and it feels so much better
Yeah,
to do that.
agreed.
So we're going to talk about a little bit of difficult things in the first little bit and get those out of the way, and then what people can do to have a much better end of life and then after death for their loved ones. So one of the very first things that I want to talk about is why do people need a funeral director?
Interesting question and a super important one. And I'll start it in a little bit of a backwards way, and that's to say that people aren't required to have to hire a licensed funeral director. They can do everything that a funeral director does on their own within their own home, within their own family. So that in BC is possible. But so why would they need one? The scope of work that needs to be done is pretty enormous when somebody dies. And unless you have taken quite a bit of time before that person in your life has died to be able to understand all that needs to go on and how to be prepared for that, and know that while a funeral director, for instance, might be able to get a death registered within a day or two, for an individual doing it on their own, it might it might take a week or more. So you'd have to be very prepared to understand all of the factors, understand all of the requirements, understand what legal applications you need to pay attention to, and all those steps that you have to go through with other institutions so that when the death happens, you've got the ability to now just step into those roles and be able to look after that. And and then understand what that kind of time lag may mean for your person who's died if you're not hiring a funeral home to be able to step in and help guide things. And then for the other family members who may not really realize what the implications of your choice to not use a funeral home, what those implications may be. And there's a way to be able to bridge that because I fully support people who really want to be able to have that agency to do things on their own and in their own time. And a way to be able to bridge that so that a funeral home isn't completely taking over, and you don't have to try and do everything on their own, is to find a licensed funeral home who will do things a la carte, if you want to name it that way, and just help you in areas that it makes sense to help you, so that the areas that are really going to give you meaning for you to do on your own, you can just focus on that. You don't have to worry so much about dotting the I's and crossing the T's and an extended timeline that you may not want to have.
That's a really good question. What comes up for me on that is that people might want to do the ceremony. They might want to do maybe even the body prep, those kinds of things. And you think that that's what people are looking for when they want to do the funeral, is they want to step in and do those things rather than the administrative pieces?
Yeah, absolutely. I truly think that that's a correct observation. I don't think people really even have a concept of how much administration there is to take care of. And not that once you inform them, they don't get it, but just that's not where their head is at when they're thinking of looking after their person who has died. They are totally thinking after or thinking about how do I care for them? How do I have the ceremony with them? And not just for me and them, but other circles of family and friends who would really benefit from coming to our home to be able to grieve them and mourn them in a quiet, comfortable space. And how do I just get to the point of being able to let go of them so that when it's time for cremation or when it's time for burial, they aren't feeling like it's all happened too soon or too quickly, or they didn't even understand how they suddenly arrived at this point. That they can just feel like they are ready for the steps that are coming, and they're willing to move forward with those. They're not just feeling forced to go through those motions. So yeah, absolutely. I really don't think people want to have to deal with registration of death and make sure they've got the paperwork correctly filled in for the cremation authorization and all of those kinds of things.
Maybe your hyper vigilant former secretary might want to those kinds of things. I do a lot of paperwork. I wouldn't want to do that part.
Yeah.
Um, so with that said, you and I had a little conversation before we started, and one of the things that we talked about was lack of preparation,
Mm.
not knowing, not um, denial that their loved one is going to die, no matter how old, no matter how sick. So let's talk about denial for a minute and how difficult it makes the whole situation.
Ugh. I think I've said this to you before. I don't feel like I know how to like really convey to people the the difficulty and the anxiety that ends up resulting from people's denial to acknowledge their end of life, to acknowledge their mortality, and then what how that translates into what happens after they've died. um, People get so stuck, and it's, I've never received any kind of truly scary medical diagnosis, so I can only imagine what it's like for people to receive a terminal diagnosis. um, and yet I really have seen the the complications that refusing to act on the information that you've been given a terminal diagnosis, how that complicates things for themselves as they're nearing death, and maybe suddenly they're realizing, oh no, I really didn't attend to making a will, for example, and I probably should have. Let alone for then their survivors, whoever that's going to be, when that person dies, and then the just the enormity of the work that they have to do when there hasn't been enough planning or any planning put in place. Um, it is night and day difference for people who have lost themselves in the denial and lost themselves in the fear of the reality of what their death will mean, not only to themselves, but then to their survivors. It is such a night and day difference between those kinds of situations and the situations where people have just accepted what this diagnosis may mean and accepted that, like it or not, it's coming. And if plans can be put into place, imperfect as they may be, at least it's something to go by. And there are kind of minimal things that people can do that just make the world a difference. So I don't even know how to put into proper words how stark those two things are. People who get stuck in their denial and can't get past it, and those who find a way to accept what their situation is and try to some degree to be able to have some preparation and planning in place. Yeah.
That's where our roles have crossed on several occasions.
Yeah.
For everybody who's out there, I tell everybody to go to Ngaio and Koru cremation, burial, and ceremony. And because you do such an incredible job of holding people's hands so incredibly warmly and personally. Um, but one of the in several of these crossovers, when I can see that somebody is approaching the end of their lives, I am very, very blunt with
Mm,
families about that the end is coming and we need to make some
yeah.
preparation now, even if it's just the initial phone call to
Yeah.
Koru to say that this will be coming
Yeah.
and their loved one will be coming, in the short term. And we've been able to have a lot of crossover that once they've made that decision of using you or any other funeral home, it's like the dam has kind of broken and
Mm,
it's not so hard to do the next step. It's like saying the name of a funeral home or saying, "What do you want?" is this huge barrier
yeah.
that once it's broken, um, it's so much easier after that.
Yeah. Yeah. So much easier. And we can't ever go back and reverse what we haven't done. Like I look at these families from both sides, the ones who've just they known that a death is imminent and coming and have done almost nothing, and then those who have done their very best to have something in place. Um, and I just, I would love for there to be a way for those who are stuck in their denial to be able to see what that outcome is going to look like in both scenarios, some kind of virtual opportunity so they can see if I can continue down this path. um, Here are some of the possible outcomes, that as I'm nearing my own death, I could then realize that I haven't written a will. This is going to cause big issues because the person who I want to be my legal decision maker is not, without a will, they don't count in the government's eyes. They don't get to be a legal decision maker. They're nowhere on the list. And my legal decision maker without a will is a family member who I don't even like. They're not close to me. They don't live close to me. They don't know who I am. They don't know what my dog eats and how to look after my dog after I've died. They don't even know where I bank. But that's going to be who is going to have to look after things. And oh no, now I am so weak and I'm so tired. The thought of having to try and manage to put enough energy into thinking through how do I get this will made is just beyond me. And now I'm at the point where I'm not even mobile. So can a lawyer or a notary public even come to my bedside? And will they deem me as being capable of doing this? Like, do I have to make sure I've got some health practitioner deeming me capable or not? Like all of these things could now become a part of your end of days. And instead of being able to just be kept pain-free and, as comfortable as possible, now this is what's going through your head. What a, and it seems like something that could just be so easily avoided. And I don't mean that to sound trite when I sound easy, because making a will isn't easy. It's a big deal. But it's still like there's a solution for this. But when you leave it so long, those solutions just become almost an impossibility.
So I'm going to jump in there because I've heard way too many lawyers say you make less than $20,000 a year,
Yeah.
you have no big assets, you don't need a will. And that might all be well and good, and there's not, they don't have a house, they don't have a car, there's nothing that they need to sell. But the funeral part is really important. So what can be done if somebody knows that they're dying, they don't have a will? Can they name a decision maker?
No,
Mm,
they cannot. The only way you can name a decision maker to speak for you after you've died, to look after all of your after death plans, your funeral plans, is by having a will. If you don't have a will and you didn't do one because you don't have lots of assets and all of that, then the government lays out an order of priority of who gets to be your legal decision maker. So if there's no will, then the next person is a spouse. And likely in that scenario, there is no spouse. And then it goes to an adult child. And that could just be a biological adult child. It doesn't have to be somebody who you have a good relationship with. And from after a spouse, all of the people that are in this order of priority are relatives, they're blood relatives. And it gets down to like if there are no blood relatives who are available or around at all, then it ends up with one first it's the public guardian and trustee office. So now we're talking government entities and the government or the public guardian and trustee office, they have to take time to explore to see are there indeed any relatives who could step into this role. And that could take them weeks. So in the meanwhile, where is your deceased body? What is happening to it? If you had any religious beliefs that needed a particular time frame to be attended to, that could just be right out the window. And then it could be that once the public and guardian and trustee has done their research, they can either say, okay, there's nobody, so we will act on this deceased person's behalf, or they'll say, there's nobody and there's not enough money for the public guardian and trustee office to act. So now we're going to hand it off to the Ministry of what is it? Social poverty reduction and
yeah.
social development and poverty reduction. And now it becomes another government entity who also has to go through their process. So the only way, even if you do not have assets that are, of note, the only way you can have your neighbor or your best friend who's not a blood relative be your decision maker after you've died is to write a will and name them as executor.
I just want to point out to people that if you're in that kind of situation, first of all, if you've got assets, please spend the money to
Yeah.
go to a good lawyer and have this done. It's not a place to penny pinch. Um, and it might cost you $1,000, maybe a bit more, but it's worth thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars if you don't do it. And maybe years and years and years of issues.
Mm.
I had one, a friend of mine was managed people's properties after somebody had died. And she said the worst one she'd seen was that the doors were locked after the person died. Nobody could go in. And it was 14 years. Nobody was
Oh,
flushing toilets. Nobody was
goodness.
nobody was making sure that there were no floods inside. There were critters and everything inside.
Ah,
And so it was one of the worst that she had ever seen. And so those kinds of things are really big. And so when I hear about a big celebrity like Prince who died without a will and he's worth like $1 billion, I just go, oh my God.
I know. I think I would just want to kind of punch him. How dare you do that?
So what can somebody, this is a really big one for the communities that I talk to, is I have so many people who come up to me and say, I have nobody.
Yeah.
I've moved from another place, or all my loved ones have died. I never had children, and they have nobody. So what can they do to plan ahead?
Yeah, they have to do a lot of due diligence, and it will probably cost them more money to be able to get things in place and or just take much more time and being really careful about how they're planning. So when I say it might cost them more money, and just as a spoiler alert, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a legal professional. But if you don't have somebody who will, can just step in to be your legal decision maker without a will, you're going to need to write a will and you have to select an executor. And if you don't have a close friend who is willing to take that on or competent enough to take that on, then probably you're going to have to hire a trustee company or trust company to be your executor. Some lawyers, of course, will also be an executor. So there will be an extra cost to your estate to be able to get that set up. And then when it comes to the end of life planning, that part doesn't necessarily cost you more. And by end of life, I mean the after death planning. That doesn't necessarily have to cost you more, but it will really benefit whoever you're going to name as your executor if not only do you have a written plan in place to say, I want a green burial, I want it to happen at Salt Spring Island Natural Cemetery. A graveside service is fine. I don't need a minister. It could just be quite a simple service, and then I don't need a marker. So not only would it be helpful to have that written out, but to also prepay for it so that you kind of have doubly secured what your wishes are by writing it out and prepaying for it and having some kind of I guess, notation in your will to say what your after death plans will be. Um, and then I think just being you have to go through and do all this work alone, and that part takes time. It's one thing when you have somebody else that you can bounce ideas off of, have them come with you, look at the different options. Maybe they're doing a little bit of research on your behalf, but when you're the one who has to do everything, then you're the one who has to do everything. And honestly, I find for people, from the time I start talking to them about planning ahead for their after death plans, it is, I would say, on average, close to a year before they've kind of got their plan in place. They know what they want, and they have potentially also prepaid for it. And that's typical of couples, it's typical of single people. So just know that there's going to be, you may not get everything done in a real expedient way.
Comes back to where our paths cross. And it so I'm going to switch to medical assistance in dying for a moment
Mm,
because more people are opting for that. And luckily, in the last few years, the providers are better about providing a list of things that you should and you should prepare ahead of time. And one of them is picking a funeral home. One of them is having a will. When we first started with the MAID processes, I was shocked that I would go to somebody's provision of death and I would say, "So when is your funeral home coming?" And they would go, "What?"
mm,
They hadn't thought of that piece before
yeah,
before their death. And so that leaves a really big mess, not having a will. So for everybody who's listening who might be considering MAID, is that you're going to be sick. When you
yeah,
are when you're considering MAID, you will only be assessed and approved if you are seriously ill. And that comes back to the frailty piece,
mhm,
um, in that this is not something you want to think about when you're in that state. I've heard a death counselor call it, you're in the in between.
mm,
You're in between alive and dead,
yeah,
and you might be talking to angels, but more than likely you're on medications that are making you um, drowsy and you're not thinking straight.
yeah,
So that comes back to the capability question. But one of the things about denial is that its close cousin is false hope.
mm, oh, yeah,
And so I hope that I have a rally next week and I'll have the energy to get this done. I hope that with this new diet, we can get this cancer under control. I hope that. And that is, it's the same as denial,
yeah,
that false hope. The other thing that often comes up when I'm doing advanced care planning is that the worst time to do advanced care planning is when you're sick.
mm,
It is stressful for you to bring it up. You know, you've
mhm,
just found out that you've got stage 4 cancer,
mhm,
and your family is hopeful that the chemotherapy or the radiation will get this cancer under control and you'll have a full life and you're not going to die. And so bringing up, shattering their hope,
yeah,
by saying, I really would, I think I should get my paperwork done can be really, really difficult. And so it's so wise to get this done ahead of time.
yeah.
And so I wanted to talk to you about what makes, we've talked about the difficult scenarios, but what makes a good death? What makes the after death good?
Well, I'm sure people will probably guess the first thing that'll come out of my mouth, and that's planning in advance and just having, not only having your plans written out, but having shared those plans with who is likely to be your key decision makers and family, like who will be that close circle around you after you've died, who will be now making good on your plans. So I think of this couple that I'd been in conversation with, and they were planning not because there was any illness, but they're just starting to get into their more senior years, and they realize they need to get stuff in order. And one of them is saying, "Yeah, yeah, no, this is all good, and we don't need to share any of this with our adult children. We'll just make the decisions." And then the other one is saying, Oh, but I wonder if, our daughter's actually going to see it the way we're seeing it, or if she's going to want something, a little bit different like this. And now suddenly, when they came in thinking that they just needed a few more pieces of information, then they would have the plan in place and they would be able to write it down and kind of secure it. Suddenly now they're having to go away and talk amongst themselves and then possibly even talk to their children, their adult children, and get their input. So that idea of having communicated your plans to who your likely survivors are going to be is so important so that there isn't any misunderstanding of what your plan was. There isn't, and I think this is something we might get into later, but there isn't any kind of guilt from the survivors of having to stick to a plan that they are not feeling totally on board with. So yeah, have your plan, communicate it with others, and of course, things are not necessarily going to be 100% perfect, but the outcomes usually are so much smoother. And you know what? The comment I always get, almost without fail, from people, the survivors of someone who's died, who made plans in advance, is, "Oh my goodness, I'm so grateful they did that. I had no idea how difficult this was going to be. And because I've got their plans to follow, this is just such a gift." And then the next thing they'll say at some point in our conversation is, "Oh, I really need to do this for me so that my kids, don't have to fumble through it." So, hands down, that is the best way to really ensure a good death. And I think that a good death, there's so many other factors that can play into what is a good death, and everybody's going to have their own interpretation or definition of it. But if you want to just be general about it, just do that. Just plan and communicate your plans. Um, and things will fall into place. So, if it's really important to you that when you die, you not be moved for, the next 4 hours, but that you just allow time for those who need to come say goodbye wherever you are, that they've got that time. Make sure you've got that noted in your plans because that means a good death for you. And I think the other side of good death is how it impacts your survivors. Like how are they experiencing your death in a good way? And I think the part that sometimes people fail to take into consideration when they're doing their own planning is how will this benefit or hinder their family, their surviving family or friends? How is it going to benefit or hinder their grief? So I'm doing all of this, and to what end? Is it just so I can have my way? Is it just so I can make sure I paid for something? Or do I also want to make sure that I'm doing my part to alleviate complications on their grief journey? I mean, you're never going to alleviate someone's grief, and that's not the point of the pre-planning. But the less complication the survivors can have, the bereaved can have, I really see, and I felt it personally, how it just helps you to just be sad about what you need to be sad about instead of also having to deal with all these other things.
There are so many things that come up for me in that, but one of them is, but what if I don't want a ceremony?
Hmm.
Do I still need to do this work?
Yeah. Yeah, man, and I hear that all the time. I don't, when I die, just cremate me and I don't even care about my ashes. They can just be thrown into the dustbin or just throw them to the wind, and they make it sound so easy peasy. And then you ask that question about, so how do you think your wife will feel about that? Or how do you think your grandson, who is super close to you, and you guys used to go fly fishing all the time, how is that going to impact them? Yeah, that's a big deal. So, do you have to do the work? no, the short answer is no. It's your decision.
There's
It's your
still some
money.
work that has to be done
Yeah.
behind the scenes. There's
Yeah.
stuff that has to be done.
And that's where I say, like, think about why else are you planning? It's not just to pay for something and have a plan in place. It's to help alleviate complications in the people you love for their grief. So maybe you don't see the benefit of having a service because you're going to be dead. And, whatever that service thing is for you that you're saying you don't need, that's fine for you, but it may not be a good decision for those who are going to survive you. And so, how can you bridge that gap? And I almost always have these conversations with people. They'll say, "This is all I want." And then you ask one little thing, and now suddenly their wheels are turning and they're thinking, "Oh, I never thought of that. Okay, maybe I better rethink that plan." And that's what I'll suggest to them is how do you bridge that? So maybe in your plan, you let it be known that um, if you feel like having a service is going to be beneficial for you, please go ahead and do that. And there will be a pot of money in some other account that can be made available. These are the plans I've made um, so that it covers the basics. And these are the things that are really important. And I want these things to be observed. And then there's this whole other area like ceremony and services that I am going to remain neutral on as the person planning for my own demise. And that will give you the space to do what you need to do. So I think those kinds of compromises can be reached.
It brings up a couple things. It's just cascading. There's just so
Yeah.
many. Um, when my mom died, she had let us know, what she wanted, but she had lived in Kelowna for 45 years
Mm,
and but had moved for the last few months of her life to the Lower Mainland. We had family in the Lower Mainland. We had all of her friends were in Kelowna. So
right.
we needed to do two things.
Yeah.
And so we didn't have the bandwidth to do two big ceremonies. So we planned the church service and everything for Kelowna, but we invited all the friends and family from the Lower Mainland to congregate in my brother's living room and kitchen.
Ah,
And it just turned into the most natural, um, you know, you know how everything just comes to the kitchen anyway.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
it just turned out so naturally that somebody just started talking about my mom, and then
Mm,
somebody else started talking, and then somebody else, and then there would be a toast, and then and it was to me way more satisfying than the
yeah.
strangers who
Yeah.
I didn't really know in Kelowna. I knew them vaguely, but the intimate was so important.
Yeah.
Which brings up the other piece for me, whereas I've had a lot of my clients die, and um, a lot of I actually don't know what the person who died wanted.
Mm,
Um, the family just came in, did their thing, and I heard so many times we're not having a ceremony,
right.
and I wanted to say goodbye. And I thought,
Right.
I'm not the only person who wants to say goodbye.
Yeah.
There are people outside of the immediate circle who have not had the time to grieve.
Yeah.
They weren't at the funeral home. They weren't there for the cremation, and so they didn't have that moment. And so I
Hmm.
just want to encourage everybody that think about the others that might
Hmm.
want to say goodbye. It's
Yeah.
important for grief.
Yeah. Oh, you bring up such a good point in saying that. I had a client several years back. I don't believe we had done any pre-planning together. And his mom was elderly when she died. And she was one of those women who she had all kinds of different um, what would you say, like interests and hobbies that she did, and none of them really connected to each other. So she would go play bridge with this group, And then she had a Tai Chi class with this group. She'd been with them forever. And then she had her friends who she'd known since high school. And then she had like a 5-pin lawn bowling group kind of thing. So none of them knew each other, but they were all super important in her life and she in their lives. And the son just instinctively knew that he was going to have to find a way to be able to do something for them. And he didn't want there to be just like one big service. Yeah, come if you can. And if you can't, oh, well, that's on you kind of thing. And so when we were talking, he was preemptively saying, yes, and I know I need to get together with the bridge group and we're going to meet on the day that they would always play bridge, and I'm going to bring my mom's picture, and he had this whole little thing set up, and he did that for all of her little
Wow.
groups, and I
Wow.
was just so amazed. and
Wow.
and it sticks out in my mind because it's not common. Most people aren't able, like you said, they don't have the bandwidth to be able to do that, and that is the thing. I mean, it's easy to feel like you're being left out of being able to pay tribute to somebody's life if you're not, in an inner circle with them. Um, but the bereaved are the bereaved, and they can only do what they can do. And so, one of the things I think that people don't think about in those kinds of circumstances, and maybe it doesn't even feel quite the same, but set up something for yourself then. And even if there's like, if there's a few people, like if that son hadn't done it, and the ladies in the bridge group said, well, to heck with it, we're just going to have our own little thing, they can do that. And so we can all do that. We can just find a way to be able to honor our people, even if we didn't get a chance to do that with the family and other people. But yeah, I mean, there's so many things to weigh up. It all takes energy, it takes time, it can take money. And I think we also end up with this urgency inside of us then when the death happens, that there is some kind of a calendar that we have to pay attention to, and we must do this by this time, or else, heaven forbid, it will look like we don't care. And there's those kinds of pressures that we put on ourselves that come from society in general. It may come from some areas of our communities. So those are all just factors. Yeah.
When I go and talk to people and they're alone, um, is it, it as we get older, we become more and more introverted generally. There are some people who don't, but generally, our bodies become more infirm. It's harder to get up and go to the club. It's harder to go to the senior center. And so we let some of those connections go. And I want to encourage everybody to keep up your connections wherever you
Mm,
can, because you brought up something really important for when we were talking before this recording, and it was that having support groups can make a huge difference
yeah.
for the family. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, and this kind of goes back to your earlier question about a good death. And I just talked about, planning, but not everybody does that planning. In fact, most people don't. And so the other aspects to a good death are having those support groups. And if you've been somebody in life who's been able to nurture your community groups, your family group, whoever those people are, and you're already really comfortable with leaning on them when you need help, allowing them to step in, asking them for help, then when there's been a death, maybe it's my mom who's died, I know who will, first of all, just step up and say, how can I help? And then I know who, even if they haven't stepped up, I know that I can just call on certain people to help me to manage certain tasks. There will be things that I will just have to do. But the more that I can have that support from the community to help delegate and look after tasks that are important, but I don't have to do them. Just the more, I mean, it just takes that load off your plate. We talk about grief brain for a reason. You know, I don't, it doesn't matter how competent and capable you are when you're the bereaved and you're the one who's having to be on the front lines of dealing with someone's death, someone who you loved and you cared about deeply, your brain just doesn't function well. So having those support circles of people who can do things for you, and maybe it's telling you to just say like, "Oh, have you had a shower today? Let's make sure you have a shower." Bringing you food, let alone helping with, you know, maybe some of the ceremony planning or to get some flowers sent or read over an obituary notice draft that you've written up, help you go through photographs. Like there's so many little things immediately after a death, let alone the days and weeks and months following where you now need to sort through that person's belongings and figure out which clothes need to just be donated and which ones should go into the rag bag. So yeah, that's such an important observation, Connie, that nurturing connection becomes, I mean, I guess you just live the benefits of it then when you're in a time of crisis and you know you've got that community around you. And if you're the person who's died and you've nurtured those connections, likely those people are also going to step up for your survivors to say, how can I help? You
Yeah.
know, I know that your mom, um, she had this pile of sewing that she kept talking about getting to, and she didn't. I know because we talked about that. Let me help you deal with that. Like they will step up. Yeah.
So I'm going to step in with a few thoughts for people who are left behind, especially the support groups or, the people who are on the outside, uh,
Yeah.
um, of the immediate circle, um, is that when when you've been gotten that call that your friend or your aunt or your cousin or whoever it is has died, I request for their sake that you be in the moment for them
Mm.
and not because it can be really triggering to
Hmm.
when somebody's died and it brings up your feelings about when your mom died, when
Yeah.
your aunt died, and those kinds of things. And you kind of barrage the person who's called you to say, um, oh, I remember when Uncle Bob died. And so stay in the moment with them. The other one that you kind of bring up is what can I do to help? Don't say, call me if you need me. You will never get that phone call.
Yeah.
Say, I've gone and done the dishes.
Yeah.
I'd like to come over and do your laundry.
Yeah.
I we've lost the connection of casseroles. Like
Yes.
knock on somebody's door and
It's
have the
true.
casserole sitting on their doorstep. It's
Yeah.
massively important because they can put it in the freezer and they might not need it today, but guaranteed they're going to need it next week or next month when everybody else has left.
Yeah.
They are going to need that kind of support. And the other thing is to not only nurture your relationships for you, but I call it the daisy chain of support, is that we need to step out of being introverted and be that person for somebody else. So
Mm.
I talk about representation agreements. Like if you belong to a church, if you belong to a seniors organization, yep, you're all the same age and you want somebody who's younger to be that decision maker, but maybe you don't have that option.
Yeah.
So you might need to do your representation agreement 4 times in the
Yeah.
next 2 years if your person dies, but be that for each other and
Yeah.
be that for each other as you're approaching end of life because we don't have the community that we had
Yeah.
even 30 or 40 years ago, where everybody belonged to a church
Yeah.
and everybody had that. And so we need to be very proactive about about nurturing that.
That's
Is
so
that right?
brilliantly said and observed. Yes, you should publish that and put it in some kind of little book, and we can stick it all in people's fridges. Yeah, yes to everything you just said. Great big yes.
Okay. Um, I want to go back to, for just a little bit, to the complex situations.
Mm,
And to just leave people, maybe I like to leave it on a positive note, so we'll find something positive. But when you have difficult family dynamics, when there's something complex going on, um, you and I have spoken many times that a family that's already on life support before somebody dies will only get worse.
yeah.
And strong families even cave sometimes. So I know that you've got a huge resource list on your website,
Mm,
and you've got a lot of grief supports. So can you tell us a little bit about that so that when people are facing this, they can go for grief support before
mm,
their loved one has died, and certainly afterwards. And it's not just about feeling sad, it's not just about the grief, but it's also about these complex family dynamics that can really, really set people back.
yeah. Man, I mean, I think probably one of the big hurdles for people, period, but in those complex dynamics is to just find the space within their brain to say, I need help. I need to get someone else's um, assistance and guidance to be able to walk me through this. And it also will, when they're able to say that, when they've got the room in their brain to be able to think that, then there's the courage to be able to do it. For reaching out for help is hard for a lot of people. It's not a natural thing to want to do. And particularly if you're in quite a bit of pain and turmoil. Um, and I think that one of the things that happens when you do that is, first of all, you realize you're not the only one who's ever gone through something that's this ridiculously difficult and this crazy complex. You're not the only one with a family that has some form of dysfunction and isn't coming together and supporting each other, or at least some family members are adding that complication. So just realizing that you're not alone in what you're going through, hopefully will help people to get some perspective on what's going on. Um, and then I guess just thinking about or understanding now with the benefits of technology, there's so many different avenues for support. It doesn't have to be we go to a grief counselor or a therapist or, a psychologist. That can be a real big, scary, intimidating thing to do. I don't know anybody. I've never ever seen a therapist. I don't even know how to begin to find one. So there's so many different avenues that we could seek help and support from. So of course, grief therapists and counselors are there and so valuable if they are a fit for you. There are drop-in groups, and you can do those in person. And I think for a lot of people now, particularly of younger age groups, like younger than baby boomers in particular, knowing that there are virtual grief groups is something that I don't think I would have thought of 15 years ago, that we'd be
Mhm.
meeting in a grief group online. Somebody could be from Texas, somebody else is from Guelph, Ontario, and here I am from Port Moody, BC. And you don't have to show your face. You could have your camera off so that you're just taking things in and getting the courage to be able to get out of it what you can, say what you can. There are grief resources that are really individualized, personalized, and they'll come to you through text messaging. So that's even another, it can be the only thing you do. It can be in addition to what you do. And there are things that you can do that don't look like grief support groups. Like there are grief groups that are walking groups, and just by being out with other people who are grieving, going on a walk, you know, if you're on the lower mainland, um, probably you'll be walking on the North Shore or somewhere out by UBC or something like that, you know, or over in Port Moody, lots of walking here. But just being out in nature and just the balm that that is for our souls. So there's all of that, and then on that, just the complexity of difficult family situations. You know, the only thing I can think of to say is that you're just so not alone. I think you'd be surprised at how many people have difficult family conversation or difficult family situations, and you may not even be needing to seek out professional help. You could start talking with the person beside you on the bus, and then the next thing, holy cow, either they've gone through that or they know someone quite well who's gone through that. And I don't know about you, Connie, but there's something about speaking deeply and intimately with somebody who you've never met before, you may never see again, how much of a relief that is. And you might be surprised at what comes out of that for you. So,
If
yeah.
you can afford, if you're going to take an American trip these days, I highly recommend a trip to Hawaii. I have talked the ears off of people and vice versa on that trip. We've never seen each other again and made some incredibly good connections. So we've been doing this a long time now, and so I want to wrap things up a little bit. Um, I want to plug your services again because I think that you and Rebecca are doing, and the rest of your team are doing something totally amazing. Invite everybody to, and we'll put it into the underneath the recording, but can you just tell people how they find you?
Thank you. Yeah, I do have social media presence, but I confess I am not a social media hound. So my recommendation would be just to go to our website, which is korucremation.com. So Koru cremation, cremation.com. Um, Tons of resources there, and you can always just reach out. Info@korucremation.com is email. You can call us. Rebecca or I are pretty personable people for the most part until we're tired and hungry. But we're always here to be able to share information and just start a conversation with you.
I want people to go to your resources. They're incredible. I have picked your website over quite thoroughly for my own website and for other presentations. You've got an incredible resource library, but I also want people to go to the obituaries
Oh,
to see how beautiful the website is and or that page is, and how personal that is, and give you ideas
mm,
about writing your own obituary or writing it for somebody else. We don't need to go to the Vancouver Sun or the province anymore or whatever. We can do an obituary on your web page and then just send the link to absolutely everybody, and it
yeah.
costs a fraction of the price, and it's so much more personal than a newspaper. I've heard that sometimes they're over $1,000 to put.
Oh, easily. Yeah.
Oh, yikes.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a lot. Yeah.
um I to close out, I want you to rack your brains for a second and come up with the most unusual and beautiful ceremony that you can think of that you've been a part of creating.
Oh boy. So this, I'll just say this will be one of, because there have just been some incredible ones. Um, and I'm hoping I don't mishmash the ceremony with some of the other ones, because there have been
Fine.
so many neat ones. Um, so this one was done outside in a park, and it was a tribute service to the person who had died. So in funeral language, that means that the deceased, the guest of honor, was not present in a casket. So it was a tribute service. And because we were having this service in a public park, and we hadn't reserved any special area of the park or any special time to be there, but because the family knew the park well enough, they knew that if we started in the morning, that's when parking would be easiest for all the guests who were going to attend. And when we gathered at the park, we knew in advance that the wayfinding markers to find where we were going to be having this tribute service would be wolf paws. So there was somebody had drawn these wolf paws and copied a whole bunch of them and printed them, and somebody had gone ahead of time and just put them up on trees along the trail we were to follow. And we came to a decent sized kind of clearing in the woods. And we were also instructed to, as we were walking along our path, to find a stick and to bring that with us. And when we arrived at this clearing, we all had our sticks. And the service was led by a trained celebrant, and she just did a beautiful job. So that was super important for the family to be able to not have to also take on that role of leading. And then the significance of our sticks was, and this was such a direct tribute to the deceased person, because this is what he used to do whenever he was out walking. He would grab sticks, and apparently he just had this crazy collection of walking sticks at his home. So we all had these sticks, and at one point during the ceremony, we were asked to step forward and just start piling our sticks in this certain spot. And it ended up being like this almost giant bonfire looking pyramid of sticks. There were, so it was in the morning. We were dressed in our warm kind of hiking clothes. Everybody was quite casual. It was totally fitting. The birds that were flying overhead, the rays of sunshine that were just like shining through the trees. And I'm not a religious person, but always think of those rays of sunshine as being like Jesus rays, just the way they come down. It was so spectacular. And there were all ages there. It was beautiful to have so many different ages of people represented. And then after that, we went back to another area of the park. And actually, this part they had reserved where we could share in some refreshments and just have that gentler, kind of more casual time together. It was just such a soul stirring kind of a service to be outside in nature and to have this really simple act of picking up a stick along the way and then leaving it there in tribute. And I heard from others that that big pile of sticks was there for weeks. Nobody else who's going into the park went and disturbed it, which I thought was just amazing that people just left it alone. I don't know if they could feel what that was all about, what the intention was. But it was a beautiful service.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
So big or small, um, the only thing that I hope for everybody is that you do plan ahead, even if it's a little bit. You know, find your funeral home, take that off of your family's plate as the one biggest thing that you can do so that they're not phoning around the night after
Yeah.
you died and trying to find out prices and will this suit our values and beliefs and all those kinds of things. Like, do that one part, even if you're not going to plan the ceremony or anything like that. And the other thing is make sure people know where your passwords are and and
Oh yeah.
and where your important documents are.
Yeah.
That causes so
Oh,
many problems when people haven't let other people know about their passwords and where their documents are and when they're hidden and those kinds of things. So, let them know who your lawyer is and those kinds of things. And just when you find out that you're sick, when you feel like you're starting to get older and frailer, please plan.
yes.
Please make that plan. You're not gonna maybe not do it when you're 30, but by the time you reach 60, 65, 70, you should be realizing that the clock is ticking
Mhm.
and it is time to put some of this in place because this is the biggest gift you can give your loved ones of all.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said, Connie. Thank you.
So thank you so much for being one of my dearest people in the world. And thank you for sharing this time. I thought we were going to be half an hour. We're an hour and a half.
Oh, silly you.
And if anybody
Yeah.
wants to join us for patio dinner, you just let us know.
That's right. Yeah.
It's
We
fun.
haven't done a big group one in a little
Okay.
while. We're due for
Okay.
that.
Thank you so